All right, welcome back to episode 3 of The Doctors Are In. The Doctors of Religion this time are coming together to talk about, you brought up a really good point in the last episode that I want to dive into a little bit because I think it really helps define the differences that we can celebrate that also help us grow as who we are. And part of that is the idea of so much of your story and your history, your forming and your identity is being part of a group of people whose very nature and existence has always been in a minority. What does it mean to have generation after generation your identity linked to very real and present trauma and persecution and danger? And how does that affect who you are as a person of faith? I know eventually we're going to end up with the idea of your role in speaking up for this community, speaking up for those who don't have a voice in the work of justice, because a lot of the times you are, I mean, that's your very role at the JCRC is like, I need to help be an advocate because so much of who I am has been formed as a people who constantly and so frequently have had struggled with this. And then you just brought up a big point. The whole podcast is this idea of holy envy because obviously you're amazing and you have had such an impact on me and I am learning and growing so much. And part of that is because I've grown up in a society that has always affirmed, understood my values. I mean, we've talked about this before, like, you know, the schools always get off for the Christian holidays, but my kids go to public school. I don't think they've ever been off for, you know, any of the other holidays and things like that. So start there with how much of an impact having all of that history and the weight of all those stories comes on to the work that you do as an advocate, as a person of justice, and as just, I don't want to say just Rori, because there's nothing just normal about you, but like, this is a deep part of who you are, and maybe that's why I'm so in awe of the work you do and the way you approach your faith and the scriptures and things like that.
Well, I think it's really important that anyone who lives in any kind of majority society recognize the ways in which the structures of society reflect you and speak to you. Mm-hmm. And I also say that as somebody who is white presenting, as somebody who is cisgender and straight, right? We can list all the ways, and many of us could also be minorities in some categories and part of a majority, or at least the way society presents a majority in other categories. And so what's important to remember whenever we're part of a majority society is that the society speaks our language. And so any minority has to learn how to speak the language of a majority, but the majority doesn't have to learn how to speak the language of a minority. And so what I mean by that is growing up in America meant I always knew when Christmas was, even if I never celebrated Christmas. And I went to a Jewish day school where we had school on Christmas, but you still needed to know when Christmas was because the buses didn't run the same way. And I remember having friends, I grew up in New York, and we would have school metro cards to get onto the subway, and student metro cards. And I had friends who were stopped by police because you were only allowed to use your metro cards to go to and from school, and it was Christmas Day and they were swiping into the subway, and the police officer was going to give them a ticket for using their metro card that day, and they had to convince him that we had school.
Even in New York. I mean, you're not in like rural Missouri or anything. Like even in that setting still there is.
Well, sure, right? And so I know there's a lot more Jews in New York, but even so, right? And so but we knew that the subways didn't run as frequently on Christmas Day. We knew that our stores might be closed on Christmas Day. We had a general sense of what Christmas was. We had a general sense of what Easter was. You knew that meters might not operate in the same sort of way. And so we had to always know those things. And yet not everybody would necessarily know when the Jewish holidays were, or the process of having to say to a teacher, no, I can't take the test that day because it's Yom Kippur, or whatever it might be. But that also works, by the way, in English. I mean, I at one point said, I think it was in the first episode, I named the 5 books of the Pentateuch, but like, that's not what we call them. I was using Christian language for that. When we start talking about Bible or scripture, right, that's me translating into another language in a way that if you were actually eavesdropping on me talking to other rabbinic colleagues, this wouldn't be the language that we'd be using. we would if we knew that you were eavesdropping and we wanted you to understand.
Yeah.
But, like, I know how to translate for you, but you're not necessarily translating back to me.
Right.
And that's not necessarily, I don't want to say that as a fundamental flaw. I want to say that as a realization, but also to say that I think as we talk about holy envy and we talk about what it is to realize another person's tradition, to recognize that there's a lot of Christianity that I've always grown up with. Mm-hmm. So this isn't both of us learning about each other in the same sort of way, because I grew up with your tradition just by nature of what it was to live in America.
Right. And for me, that's what made, from the very beginning, this friendship so powerful, is that you created this space to say, I know that you probably are starting from scratch. And I'm going to love you through all the mistakes you're going to make. And I'm going to help you with this. I remember, like, the first time that I was like, oh my gosh, I want to cook you dinner. And you're like, let me explain how kosher works. And you can't use your oven and things. But I was like, but I want to make you dinner. And look, I knew not to put bacon on the table. And you're like, great start. Let's go a little further. Like,
right. And so, but look, I think you have to, right? I mean, if we're going to, like, I can't afford, I was saying before in the last episode, we can't afford to start kicking Jews out of this process. We can't afford to start kicking other people who want to engage with us out of this process. But it translates to your question in terms of justice work also, of, I think for part of it, it might be having that experience of knowing what it is to be a minority, though I don't want to only claim it in that way, because I don't want to say that anyone who doesn't have that experience shouldn't be part of that work.
Right.
But I would definitely say for our Jewish community in America, so I've said now numerous times that Jews have existed for the overwhelming majority of our history as a minority. Mm-hmm. The reality is that we've existed overwhelmingly as a persecuted minority, yes, and as not citizens of the states in which we've lived, and never actually having security that we wouldn't be kicked out of the countries where we resided.
I remember that when you said, like, you know, you would say nationality is Judaism, when really it demonstrates the complexity of your identity. Like, you are an American, and so, like, what does it feel like to have all these layers, and more importantly, to have other people in power say, no, you're not? You know?
So luckily for me, I don't have as much of that experience, because in America's been the first country in diaspora, so outside of a sovereign Jewish country. America's been the first country where Jews have been able to attain equality at a level that we've never attained before. So even after the Enlightenment, when you have citizenship in France debates, can Jews ever become citizens? And the question was always this idea that Jews couldn't be as loyal to the countries where we lived as we could be to other Jews or to a foreign entity. And America was the place where we were able to attain that level of equality. But we were able to attain that level of equality because of civil liberties that America afforded. Things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to vote, right, that was granted. And I want to be careful, because the way we tell the story of America, the American dream, Jews were able to achieve, even as we acknowledge that that was never a universal story for all peoples.
Right.
And so what I'm really proud of in the Jewish community, and of course, you said before, I can't speak for all Jews, and certainly, but overwhelmingly, Jews recognized early on in America that we needed to be civically engaged. We needed to take advantage. Jews vote at disproportionate amounts compared to the rest of society, but we also get involved in political campaigns, donate to charities and political causes, and participate in marches, put yard signs on, any number of things we will do, because we realize the importance of what it is to have a voice, both for preserving that for the Jewish community, but also recognizing that anytime any group of people could be discriminated against, Jews are going to be right there with them, or going to be next on the list.
Right.
And so it has become a narrative of both universal importance, but also self-preservation, to say that we need to be involved in justice work, because the Jewish community is only going to be limited in its safety if any group of people can be legally discriminated against in this country.
I think that's what really surprised me, because in many ways, I would say the fact that we've got 3 kids the same age, we are both young females called to work in religious life. I mean, there are a lot of similarities between us in our work, and we will joke about that a lot. But I think one of the things that really surprised me in that, being 2 women of faith with the scriptures, but in our job context, so little is expected, or I'm allowed to allocate my time to the work of justice, and that seems to be overwhelmingly a lot of the work you do. And so watching all of the time that you would say, I have to go to the Capitol because we need to give testimony and witness and stuff. For me, in my context, I go, well, maybe I could take a day off and do it. But for you, you're like, no, this is my job. This is how I live out being a clergy woman in this religious setting, and how deeply that is tied to your, I would say, identity and work that you do.
Do you remember how freaked out I got when I found out that you didn't have passports for your kids?
Oh my gosh, this is the perfect story, right? Because
Right?
we were going, what was it?
I don't remember. I think you were talking about coming with me to Israel one time. We were talking about doing a trip because
I'd only go with you. Yeah.
I think right. We were talking about going, and you were saying like and then you said, well, I need to get my kids' passports, and I froze. I said, you don't have passports for your children?
Or like I had one, but not all three.
You didn't have all three. And I remember I looked at you and I said, what do you do if you need to flee immediately? And
this was the conversation that made me go, we are coming from two different histories here. Because my
Right.
thing was like, oh my gosh, the cost of passports and stuff. And for you, you're like, this is a non-negotiable.
Right. And I don't know any Jewish person in America today who
Did you
does not
tweet
have
it and they all made fun of me?
Yeah, absolutely. I said like, this is like the key difference. Like, I don't know a Jewish person who doesn't have an unexpired passport. I mean, and like, let alone like, you can't let your passport expire. I mean, God forbid. But I mean, that's generations of generational trauma of people who had to leave countries on barely any notice, or who then weren't able to escape from countries. I mean, we kind of joked at one point also, I think we've brought up numerous times in our friendship, where I don't even remember. This was actually probably weird of me the first time I ever went to your house. No. But I remember like looking, and I think I like sort of jokingly said to you like, oh, you could hide us here if we needed to. And then the first time you came to my house, you said, oh yeah, oh, we could hide here. And I looked at you and I said,
in what
Katie,
context?
It doesn't go in that direction.
Yeah. In what context do you think I'm safe and I'm having to hide you? It's
Right.
always going to go the other way.
But well, and it's also like, and maybe there's a context where you're unsafe, but if you're unsafe, I've already been long unsafe. Like,
yeah.
That's just the reality of the lives that we live. And so that idea of like, I don't have to understand this, or I don't need to be worried about it, doesn't exist for most of our Jewish community, because that fear is so real. And we can talk about it as this inherited trauma of, I mean, like, I'm only here and alive and in America because I had great grandparents who said, we got to get out right now, right? And because they then had the ingenuity and were able to figure out a process for my family to get here. Because you have to realize that in the Jewish community, the alternative was your family could have just been wiped out. I mean, there's other countries they might have ended up at, but right, like, so I'm here as a byproduct of great grandparents who said, yes, it is time to leave everything we knew behind and get on that ship and get to another place. And so maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's just sort of knowing and seeing the ways in which narrative about the Jewish community can shift so quickly. But as soon as we in the Jewish community start to hear this dehumanization language that can be perpetuated against the Muslim community, against the trans community, against so many others, we immediately say, you know what, they said that about us. And we know, that it's really quick from that language to laws that persecute, to a denaturalization, to being kicked out, or to being physically harmed or arrested. And B, if they can say it about them, they can say it about anybody, and someone's going to start saying it about us.
Yeah. And I think you really awoke in me, or showed me the need to really say, I think especially in our context in America, the dehumanization, the politicizing is being done in the name of God. Even if you and I both adamantly agree that is not what God wants. But if I do have the privilege, the power, the platform to stand up and say, no, as someone who marginally is connected to what I think is a far too conservative, radical, dangerous understanding of this, like, it is important for me to say something because I can say now, even from the pulpit, like, when we talk about these things, it's not just, oh, it's those people. This is my best friend, Rori. And it sparked a passion in me because I saw that deep passion and awareness in you. And I think of all the ways that you have made me a better pastor, I think that's one of the most powerful and tangible ones is the need to say, you know what, going and protesting or writing centers and stuff, it's not optional anymore. Like, this is our faith. This is what we need to be doing. And the idea of like, well, you can't politicize what you believe, like, that division is not even possible in your world. And therefore, I don't know, it was an awakening for me, I would say. And all my kids have passports now. Just so you know, we've taken care of that, okay?
I actually do sleep better at night knowing that. It's maybe that sounds odd, right? But it's
yeah.
If there is a person, if anyone who's listening to this thinks, well, that's a cause that I don't need to be involved in, then I'm not saying, look, it's impossible. There's so much suffering and injustice in the world. We can't all hold every piece of it.
Right.
We would just collapse from it. So I recognize that, and I'm not criticizing anyone for needing to take a step back sometimes. But I think we also need to acknowledge that anytime we say, I'm going to sit that out, that's a privilege, right? Sitting it out means my body's not on the line, my family's not on the line, my best friend's not on the line, or I don't think I'm next. And it's okay to realize that, but I would hope that every person in saying that would then stop and say, that's a privilege I have, and then pause a beat and say, can I use that privilege? Because if the only people who are putting their bodies on the line are the people whose bodies are already on the line, then that increases their danger significantly and may or may not actually yield real lasting change. We were just at Pride, and I was amazed at all the corporations that were there. And on the one hand, there's sort of this feeling of like, oh, like, okay, like McDonald's suddenly needs to have a rainbow, whatever, you know, and like we can mock it. But the reality is that when the corporations get onto causes, when the corporations put Black Lives Matter on all their websites, when the corporations realize that they need to make their logo rainbow for Pride Month, that's when we know we've made a significant shift in society, because now it's not just the people who are the ones who are on the line walking at the front. We realize that the corporations who are only interested in monetary gain realize that this is advantageous to them. We've started to shift society.
Yes. So I think you talk about the importance of change, and I think I just need to close this by saying, I'm going to be cheesy here because we went and saw Wicked together.
Yes, we did.
And it was a season we were both working through some stuff, so we were tender, we were raw. And that point at the end where they say, like, because I knew you, I've been changed for good. Like, that's the heart of all of this. Like my life is better because you're in it. And I would say that even if we weren't on a podcast right now, because I say it a lot, because...
She does. She says it a lot. Sometimes it's embarrassing, but I would say...
Oh, absolutely. We could make t-shirts that say it. You knew I was going to go there.
You're in charge of the shirts.
Okay. We hope that you have been blessed by listening to this podcast and that it, in some ways, sparks an interest and a change in you that will make the world a better place. Would you agree? That we can agree on.
I would agree.
Thanks for joining us.